Hello and welcome to US News and World Report. I'm Simon Owens, and here with me I have Arun Sundararajan, an economist and professor at NYU Stern School of Business. Hello, Arun.
Hi, Simon. How are you?
I'm doing well. And today we're going to talk about the sharing economy, is what you call it, and whether local governments should actually regulate it. Arun, can you tell me what you mean by the sharing economy?
A lot of people have told me that they tend to get sort of a little distracted by the term sharing, because it conjures up this image of people sort of giving each other stuff out of the goodness of their heart. But by the sharing economy is basically a collection of marketplaces that allow people to transact with each other and offer to each other assets, like physical stuff, that we previously used to buy. So say, for example, you don't want to own a car, but you want access to it you want access to a nice car periodically. Your options in the past were you either owned it, or you took taxis, or you went to Hertz or Avis or one of these rental car companies. So now the sharing economy has created a wide variety of options where you can get someone who owns a car to drive you around. You can borrow their car. And I say borrow in quotes because it's a marketplace in which you pay them for the use of their car for a few hours. And so it's creating a whole bunch of new ways in which we can utilize stuff more efficiently by motivating people to, get a much wider variety of things than they otherwise could have gotten. And by motivating people to actually sort of provide these to others for little slices of time.
Mm-hmm. And there's actually been a few cases in which local governments have tried to step in and regulate these industries. Can you talk about like some of the major ones that have made in the news?
Okay, I guess the ones that are in the news most frequently are, apartment sharing and car sharing. And so maybe we can touch on both of these. It's useful to sort of look back at why we have regulation for, say, taxis in the first place. Regulation is introduced because we want to make sure that people who travel in taxis feel safe and that there aren't too many taxis on the road. Because if a bunch of people start driving, if there are too many taxis on the road, that leads to too much traffic. If people don't feel safe in taxis, they're not going to use the service. And, I bring that up because that's, in some sense, the real purpose of a regulator. They want to sort of step in when the market can't take care of itself. We don't have, grocery shopping. When I go to buy groceries from the grocery store, that's not sort of regulated in the same way that, taking a taxi is regulated, because I feel safe going and picking up stuff from the grocery store. So that's an important point, that the government steps in when the market can't take care of itself. And so in the past, people have hesitated to get into a taxi unless they're guaranteed that they'd be paying the right fare, that the driver's been certified, that the vehicle's been inspected. So now we've got a whole bunch of new ways of sort of sharing cars, thinking of taxis as one way of sharing cars. And so, because we've got these new ways of car sharing, the people who regulate taxis sort of look at these and say, hey, these kind of look like taxis. They're providing the same sort of capabilities as taxis, but they don't fit into the boxes that we've drawn, that we've sort of put in place sensibly to make sure that taxis were safe. This is sort of a natural consequence of progress, right? That, once you invent a new way of doing something old, it's not going to fit into the new sort of the old rules and regulations that have been put in place to make the old stuff safe. And so we've had the people who offer ride sharing, like Sidecar, like Lyft, like Uber, run into problems with local regulators in a wide range of cities: San Francisco, Austin, New York.
Mm-hmm. But doesn't every single industry that comes around, doesn't it always try to claim that it can regulate itself? Like, isn't that always the most common, the common refrain whenever regulators start to step in? Like, how is this any different, really?
Well, that's a good point, because, when thinking about whether that claim actually makes sense, a good thing to think about is, well, what are the benefits of regulation? Is it actually going to make the marketplace function better? Is it going to lead to value creation? Is it going to lead to more productive exchange? Is it going to lead to better resource utilization? And if it turns out that the regulation is sort of preventing people from exchanging stuff or transacting or share, I don't want to use the word sharing, but for conducting transactions that otherwise would be possible and both parties want, then you know the regulators shouldn't be stepping in. If, on the other hand, I want to ride share or I want to sort of rent other people's apartments for short periods of time, but I can't because I don't feel that it's safe, that's a good point for regulators to step in. And so, I don't want to make the, I don't think that we should make the case that the sharing economy should be completely unregulated or that it will self-regulate perfectly on its own. But I think it's a good point in time to step back and think about why do we have regulation of apartments? Why do we have regulation of taxi cabs or rental car companies in the first place? And what are the things that the regulators used to do, like ensuring safety, ensuring that the fares were accurate, ensuring that the vehicles were inspected, ensuring that the drivers were well trained? Which parts of these things are being done by the marketplace themselves, and which parts do the regulators need to step in for? Mm-hmm. And so, if I had to sort of break it down, I would say that, there's two roles that the regulators are playing, say, just sort of sticking with taxi cabs. There are two roles that they're playing. One is that they are screening people. They're making sure that before you become a taxi cab driver, you jump over a bunch of hurdles, and so that you're safe and you're certified, your car is safe and certified, like, you're not going to charge the wrong amount and you're not going to do anything. You've gone through some sort of screening. The other role that regulators are playing is that they're sort of the place of last recourse. They're a place that you can go to if something goes really wrong, right? So, I think that a lot of the new sharing economy marketplaces are starting to do some of the screening themselves pretty well. And I think what we should do is give them a couple of years, sort of set up some sort of safe harbor for them where they can operate with some sort of minimal rules and see how things transpire. And then decide, well, maybe these parts of, screening that regulators used to do, the markets are doing that themselves, and so it's best sort of left to the markets. But there are these other parts, like perhaps there are a lot more exceptions that come up, because if you've got 50 different ways of getting a ride from one place to another, the chances of something going wrong or something unusual happening are a lot greater. And so the regulators can sort of beef up their role there and say, well, because the regulators are sort of for us, right? At the end of the day, they are part of the government, and their role is to, make sure that we can get the stuff that we want sort of in a productive way and that we are safe.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned the hurdles that like taxi companies have to jump over, and you mentioned in op-eds and things like that a lot of the people who push for these regulations are kind of the entrenched industries in those particular cities, like the local hotels, local cab companies, and limousine companies. But can you really have any kind of sympathy for their argument? I mean, they do have all these regulation hurdles that they have to jump through. They have taxes they have to pay, health inspections they have to meet. They have to train their taxi drivers, all these kinds of things. And it's like the government is, in some ways, is playing favorites because it's putting all these hurdles that they have to jump through, and then they're watching these new competitors come up that don't have to jump through those hurdles. So can you kind of sympathize somewhat with them feeling like they're not really playing on the same ballpark?
Well, I think everybody is playing their intended role sort of in this, at this point in time. It's natural for the incumbents, the people who are already there, to say, well, we conform to the regulations, the new guys have to as well. It's natural for the new guys to say, but hey, we don't really need these regulations because we're doing part of what the regulators used to do. Our marketplaces are taking care of them. so don't shut us out. And it's natural for the regulators to say, hey, we've created these rules, stick to them as their sort of initial, as their starting point. And so, all of the players here, the incumbents, the regulators, and the new companies are sort of saying what you'd expect them to say. And what I really think we should do is sort of create this bubble, create this safe harbor, create this period of time, city by city, where we say this is value creating. Consumers seem to want ride sharing. They seem to want Airbnb's apartment sharing. They seem to want the wide variety of appliances that they're renting on Snapgoods. They seem to want the services that are getting off, all the different companies. And that's an important point. If the government sees that these are things that consumers want and that are creating value for consumers, and they take the approach of, okay, this is a different way of them getting the services that they used to get from the hotels or from the taxi cab drivers or by buying stuff like, at Best Buy. Let's think of ways to keep them safe. Let's think of ways to make this exchange more efficient rather than taking the approach of let's try and fit them into the old box. But that's the natural response of a regulator up front. They're going to say, well, you aren't conforming to our rules. And it takes pressure from industry groups, from consumer advocacy groups, perhaps from sort of government officials higher up, to have the vision to see, well, these things are actually benefiting our consumers. Now let's let them continue to utilize resources more efficiently and to get the services that they want. But let's put in place a new set of guidelines and rules to keep them safe. Mm-hmm. And so I think that the playing field has to change because the business models have changed and because what the web and social going online has made possible is different from 20 or 30 years ago where the regulations were put in place for the hotels or the taxi cabs or the rental car companies.
Mm-hmm. And obviously these entrenched industries have very strong lobbies in their particular cities. As these new upstarts are kind of challenged from city to city, where do you see a lot of times that the local governments are siding with? Are these kind of sharing economy type companies, are they able to overcome these lobbies, or how are the chips kind of falling?
Well, I think it's pretty early in the game at this point. I think that there is a process of education that is going on where the government officials are sort of starting to learn about these new ways of conducting transactions, of these new ways of quote-unquote sharing. And so I don't see a scenario where the regulators are just sort of saying, well, we don't want this new form of business in our cities. They're approaching it in the way that you'd expect them to approach it. And so at this point, it is, in some cases, a bit of a struggle for the early stage companies. And I think an important thing to keep in mind here is that it's not as if the Airbnbs and the Sidecars and the Ubers and the relay rides of the world and the get-arounds have invented a completely new paradigm of something. We've just sort of expanded it in its scope. I mean, people have historically borrowed other people's cars. They have informally borrowed other people's apartments for a few days. They've borrowed other people's vacuum cleaners. They've hired people to come and assemble their IKEA furniture. They've borrowed someone's expensive dress for a party. But this was in the context of their local sort of social network. Now, what we're doing is that we're sort of blowing that up across the internet and making it possible across people who otherwise didn't really know each other. And we're using the glue of online social networks and reputations to make that possible. And so if the governments and the regulators realize that this is an old behavior, this kind of let me utilize my resources more efficiently by borrowing someone's car or by staying in someone else's apartment, it's just sort of expanded in its scope. And so it's not as if we have to think of this as a new taxi cab service and apply the taxi cab laws to it. We should think of it from the other way, which is to say that these are activities that used to happen. Like, I'd give my neighbor's kids a ride to school. It's just that now, or I'd you pick up a friend from the airport. These are activities that used to take place within the local, sort of your own social network. So if the government thinks about it as these activities have always been happening, it's just that now they've expanded in their scope. They should look at, what do the marketplaces and the fact that we've got all this social information online, how much safety are they providing? And what do we need? How do we need to fill the gaps? So if they sort of start with a blank slate, think about it as local, social, going global, and think about how do we keep this safe, because it is valuable, because it is sort of, I'm very happy to be sort of thinking about this sharing economy, because unlike other sort of revolutions that have been sort of instigated by digital technologies or by social going online, by the fact that we're all using mobile, it's actually one which has, not just the profit motive or the fact that we're getting things more conveniently, but it's also really resource efficient. We're actually taking assets that we have rather than creating new ones and sort of repurposing them. And that's what's really exciting to me, because the digital revolution that we've witnessed over the last decade, which has taken books online, which has taken music online, which has taken television online, which has sort of changed publishing, which has sort of led US News, for example, to have a Google Hangout instead of a print interview. It's always been about things that were digital, things that were sort of digitizable. But now we're taking our existing physical assets, and it's almost like we're slicing them up in time and in space and making them amenable to exchange. And so it's sort of a development that is potentially going to lead to a much more asset efficient and resource utilization efficient world. And so that's really something that the regulators and the government should sort of think towards as they think about, let's think about what new rules or what new sort of safety guidelines we put in place to facilitate this new kind of sort of things that used to happen locally, socially, going global.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Arun, those were all the questions I had. Thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, thanks, Simon.
All right.